Okay, good afternoon. As you know, the 16th session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is going on this week and next, with a focus on the 10th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And one of the achievements since the declaration was adopted in 2007 was the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that was held in 2014, where member states reaffirmed their support for the declaration and committed to taking relevant measures at the national level. So this press conference will look at what the progress on the ground has been over the last 3 years since the World Conference. And we have 3 distinguished speakers here to discuss this with us today. The first one on my right is the Honorable Royal Jonah Kxao, and I will let him pronounce his name properly. Maybe, can you help me out? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairperson. The name is Royal Jonah Kxao.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So he's the Deputy Minister for the marginalized people of Namibia. He's an ethnic San, and he was the first San to serve in Parliament, and he's also the first San minister in his country. In the middle, we have Mr. Jesus Guadalupe Fuentes Blanco. He is a vice chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and he also chairs the Consultative Council of the National Commission for the Development of Indigenous Peoples in Mexico. And on the far side, we have Mr. Rune Fjellheim. He's the director for the administration of the Saami Parliament in Norway. His areas of expertise include Indigenous peoples policy development, multilateral negotiations, Arctic policy issues, and climate change. They will each make some brief remarks now, and then they'll take your questions. So we'll start with the Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The General Assembly, in its resolution 65/198 of the 21st December 2010, decided to organize a high-level plenary meeting of the General Assembly to be known as World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that took place on the 22nd to the 23rd of September 2014 here at the United Nations, which was the first of its kind. The objective of this conference was in order to share perspective and best practices on the realization on the rights of indigenous peoples, including pursuing the objectives of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Namibia was pleased to have participated in this conference. Namibia welcomes the efforts of the international community to address the rights of the indigenous people and expresses full support and solidarity with indigenous peoples of the world. Namibia voted for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007 with other 143 member states of the United Nations. The government of the Republic of Namibia recognized that the San Ovatwe of Achimba communities of Namibia are particularly marginalized groups that have been identified in various Namibian laws and policies as a group that merit special attention and concern. Currently, the Division Marginalized Communities is operating in the presidency, headed by myself, Royal J.K. Kxao, Deputy Minister for Marginalized Communities. This is the first time in the history of our country that a representative from the marginalized community has been appointed at a ministerial level by His Excellency Dr. Hage Gottfried Geingob, President of the Republic of Namibia, to head this division. Education, resettlement, and livelihood support programs were identified as a key development components to poverty alleviation among these communities. Hence, the government has prioritized them as a key priorities towards addressing the socio-economic situation of the marginalized communities in a spirit of a Harambee prosperity plan, and that nobody must be left out in the Namibian house. These programs also enjoyed throughout the years the continuous support and positive relations with the local public and private stakeholders and multilateral organizations such as the International Labour Organization, Spanish Cooperation, and Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agents, abbreviated TICA. In 2012, the Namibian government also invited the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous issues to visit Namibia, and would like to thank him for his positive reporting on our achievement and his recommendations. There are 5 traditional authorities from marginalized communities recognized by government, which are also members of the Traditional Authorities Council. This year, the government, together with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, held a consultative conference in Namibia on the drafting of the white paper on indigenous peoples. On the implementation of the human rights mandated area, the Constitution of Namibia provides for the Bill of Rights, and all Namibians are treated equal before the law and are allowed to participate in their own culture without any discrimination. We would like to acknowledge that we need to do more as a country for the marginalized communities, but due to limited resources, we can only just implement actions within our means. We therefore urge the United Nations and the United Nations agencies to continue and strengthen its support to member states in the implementation of its programs. We also urge the United Nations system to continue with the implementation of equal representation of all indigenous peoples from different continents in its decision-making process. In conclusion, as we are gathering here as peoples of the world at the United Nations celebrating the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Republic of Namibia will once again affirm and commit itself to the implementation and ratification of all the United Nations Declaration, conventions, and treaties as a member state. And if time permits, I would like to elaborate more about the education support. The high literacy rate among these communities are receiving attention to ensure that learners and students from the communities are having access to education like all Namibians. The division coordinates, among others, the identification of beneficiaries for education support, facilitate enrollment of students in tertiary institutions, and render financial transportation support to learners and students. The office also coordinates projects for construction of permanent building for schools, early childhood centers, and teachers' houses at various resettlement centers. The estimated budget used for this education support program constitutes 60% of the total allocated budget to division marginalized communities during 2015 and 2016. It is worth mentioning that the current number of learners and students from the communities under the support of this program is standing at approximately 500 for the year 2016. Now coming to the resettlement and relocation. Access to land plays a vital role in the development of these communities in Namibia. Therefore, the provision of land to the landless is regarded as the important development aspect. It is delighting to mention that the government, through the Ministry of Land Reform, has procured various farms for the resettlement of San communities in Ucho area. These include farms namely Serenkop, Kopis, Balaleika, Moiplas, Toesvlei, Nugas, Verda, where more than 800 households have been relocated. In addition, a farm on Ondera in Ochukoto region has also been purchased for the resettlement of approximately 350 households, San communities from Ochivelo resettlement areas. The government has also resettled more than 278 households, San communities in Ochodonjupa region at Farm 8 Coms. This total to more than 65,000 hectares of resettlement areas for these communities so far. During this period, the government has also resettled San communities in communal areas such as Liquaterera, Kavango East region, Oshana or Hangwena region, and also in Omaheke region. 20 houses project for construction in Corridor 17, Omaheke region, has been launched. In Kunene region, Ipupa constituency, the Ovatwe and Wachimba communities have been settled in 3 villages, Ochomuru, Ochikoye, and Ayua. At all the resettlement farms and village post resettlement support continues to be availed to the communities. This includes agronomic and horticultural project, distribution of livestock, access to water and housing, education, health facilities, supply of farming materials and equipments, and general provision of post-resettlement support. Livelihood support. The provision of coffins to these communities has been identified by the government to make sure that communities are receiving dignified burials. And an amount for the provision of coffins is not less than 80,000 Namibian dollars per month. Due to extreme poverty amongst the marginalized communities, the office has continuously to distribute the food rations among these communities under the Sun Feeding Program on monthly basis. Income generation projects have been implemented in almost all the resettlement farms and villages, such as garden project, wood project, and others. The division also facilitated the employment opportunities for San, Ovatwe, and Obachimba young people in private sector as well as in various aligned ministries, including the Ministry of Safety and Security, the Ministry of Defense, and also in the National Youth Service, and that is the Ministry of Youth Service and National Service. With these few remarks, let me thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Fuentes Blanco.
Good afternoon. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I believe that the 10th anniversary of the Declaration for the Rights of the Indigenous People gives us the opportunity to brainstorm, to pause and identify what has been done and what we need to do. I believe that we should have to highlight, firstly, the declaration has been a point of global consensus amongst peoples, member states, that has enabled us to define a certain line of work, a line that we can walk together. I believe that we have the great opportunity to talk about the rights of the original peoples, which translate into several vortexes such as lands, territories, culture, traditional knowledge, amongst others. And I believe that in this session, we should brainstorm about this. I believe that we have made advances. 10 years don't just pass for the sake of passing. We have to see that something has been done. Something has to move. And I think that one of the important topics, which was mentioned by my colleague, is the fact that there's a world summit, a summit that, again, enables us to talk about commitments or realign those that needed to be redefined, and that now has the participation of member states, even those that had not considered such and that now are adopting the declaration. What is important about the declaration? That the states assume them or embrace them in their legislature. But more importantly, what can we do for these to be implemented amongst indigenous peoples? How do we get there so that these do not just stay in the initial phases of legislature, but that they go through such rank and that they become a continuous social effort day by day, and so that it may benefit its indigenous peoples. I believe that we have the opportunity to secure certain situations, lands, territories, and all the inputs in the environment. I believe it's been demonstrated that they're best preserved in indigenous lands. So I believe that we have something to teach the states, the Western cultures. I believe that we also have the opportunity to be known, because perhaps we know the states, we know the West, but I don't know if the Western knowledge has taken the opportunity to get to know us, because as we get to know each other better, we will have greater political willingness, real political will, in order to work together. I would not understand an assessment upon 10 years if it doesn't part from the view of what have we done, what is the reality, and what do we have left to do. Here in the Permanent Forum, we are looking for ways to give answers to these issues and these dynamic situations. Our societies, our peoples are moving fast, and we're not reacting as fast to the situation. So it's a present challenge. There are situations that are still to be addressed, of course. Now we have to see which ones we're going to undertake, which ones are important, but also which are the priorities, because we can recognize that they're all necessary. So I believe that we have to place ourselves in this reality, in accepting that we have needs and obligations that merit a quick and fast response from institutions. The UN is a great institution, but it is precisely because it is so great, so large, it is complex. We must understand how it works. And giving a quick response and a quick reaction, as we're able to talk with all the agencies, with all the actors in these different situations. I also believe that another achievement, without a doubt, is the consideration for the participation of indigenous peoples in the UN General Assembly. Today, during this session, we are working as to what advances are being made, how these proposals of mechanisms is developing so that it might allow us to ensure a voice for the indigenous peoples, an ability to speak, but for us to be able to do it in the best possible fashion as human beings, as persons, one-on-one. Perhaps these are high aspirations, but if we do not set high aspirations, then there will not be much that we'll be able to achieve. I believe that those that have come before us did have those high aspirations, and today we are harvesting from this. And nowadays, we must continue to have high aspirations and continue to work so that we continue to have achievements. Perhaps once we reach the 5th year, now we can say, well, now it's been 15 years, and then later on another 20 years, we might have to make new revisions. But I believe that this review should be done day by day, year after year, because I am not able to conceive the type of work that only lasts a certain period of time, because now 5-10 years is a long time, and everything is built day by day. I believe that we are required to review this, especially us as indigenous peoples, to review it, check it day by day to make sure it is happening, so that when we reach year 15 or year 20, we can have results that allow us to define clearly our work. I believe that a lot of us know what results we have. The presence of indigenous here at the UN is one of those achievements. Now, participation in a permanent forum, Now, participation in how we can form strategies for the benefit of indigenous peoples in different states, that's another achievement, or part of that achievement, if we can call it so. Now, the consideration for participation in the UN's General Assembly. But we must continue to work so that it can happen in the best way possible, and it doesn't stop in just the documental aspects, but that it become real, that it become operative, factual, so that we'd be able to talk about greater benefits for our indigenous peoples and communities. I believe that we need a strategy, a more clearly defined strategy of work that will allow us translate from all these cross-cutting topics to do it in a more efficient way. I invite indigenous peoples and communities, I'd invite the member states to take advantage of this opportunity to come close together. I think that we can have greater achievements if we have this willingness and we get closer in a dialogue, in communication that can allow us to pursue common objectives and generate agreements, and that enable us to continue to walk the way that we have so far. I would like to close by a phrase that we have embraced in Mexico, which is very important, that indigenous peoples want to continue to be who we are, but we do not want to remain the way we are. I believe that this is our reality. Thank you for listening to me.
Mr. Fjellheim?
Thank you so much. A lot has already been said. I won't tire the press corps with too many factual background things that hasn't already been touched upon. Just wanted to say that the Saami Parliament of Norway was the proud facilitator of the ALTA 2013 preparatory conference that gathered indigenous peoples from all 7 socio-cultural regions in Alta, Norway, for a preparatory conference before the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in 2014. Since the decision mentioned in 2010, indigenous peoples worked hard globally to make sure that this World Conference actually reflected the views of indigenous peoples. And during the negotiations for a preparatory statement from the outcome document from the ALTA conference, we managed actually to get a global consensus among indigenous peoples on the issues that linked us together and which were pressing to us to get the UN to sign on to. We also continued that work, of course, and we are pleased with the consensus reached by the General Assembly on the World Conference outcome document. And the WCIP process is just one more example that at least we feel that the UN is delivering on the request from indigenous peoples. It responds to the challenges that we have, and UNDRIP and the World Conference is just a couple of examples. Permanent Forum, MRIP, and other institutions established are responses to the requests from indigenous peoples to be heard on the global arena. And we find it encouraging that states manage to actually agree with us as long as we meet on a global level. And but the real challenge, of course, is that how does this then turn into policies when we go back home? And that's one of the paradox that is partly the UN's challenge onwards as a collective intergovernmental body, but also the individual government's responsibility. I would like to just highlight a couple of issues that has been important for us. We, in the WCIP process, we managed to get an agreement on strengthening the MRIP mandate, and there was also a call for countries to establish action plans regarding the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It also called for a stronger participation process, participation by indigenous peoples at the GA level. And that is, all of those are emerging concepts that are about to be materialized as we speak, actually. The last one is under negotiation now. But we also, at the same time, sense a shift in attitude towards these questions. In a long period, there was a strong focus on developing the global human rights, and indigenous peoples benefited from that, both politically and also financially, of being supported for actually establishing these rights. The problem is that we now see a move globally from focus on human rights towards very pure economic focus. And that means that when these rights have been established, it's hard to actually get support for making those rights to make those rights actually work and protect and defend those rights by indigenous peoples. So I'm sorry to say that there's to some extent, also in my country, you have the sense that enough is enough. Rights are established, laws are passed, but then there is a third sort of, or a second way of holding you back, and that's sort of cutting down on your financial means, making sure that you don't have the resources to fulfill your rights and actually go through on that. And that is a concern. So we are disappointed that, for example, our government that has championed and still are fighting hard on the global arena for indigenous people's rights, for example, have not responded to the call for an action plan for how the declaration is followed through nationally, although we have requested such a process from the Saami Parliament side. That's one example. I don't want to go too much into detail, but we see now an emerging tendency, and I hope it won't sort of become much more than a tendency. And that is when people are, and individuals and groups in our country are seeing that the political way of finding the political solutions are drying in. The new option has become taking issues to court and stem government bodies, and there's one court issue that has just gone through the lowest and the next level of courts, where the government actually has lost in both instances, with reference to international commitments that Norway have made. And there's an emerging issue on a bordering river agreement between Norway and Finland that is also on its way into the court system. we are not necessarily happy with that. We would like to see that we move on when it comes to political solutions. We don't see that this necessarily brings anything good. It's a lot of efforts that goes into bringing issues to court. But we have at least registered that the courts have become sensitive also to international standards. So the hard work by indigenous peoples on the global level is now also bringing results to the national courts. I think I'll just stop with that and open for questions.
Yeah, we'll take some questions, yeah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Waldo. I'm from Latin American news agency, Prensa Latina. I have two questions. The first one, 10 years after the declaration and 3 after the conference, what are the main challenges to achieve the fully recognition and participation of indigenous people in societies? And the second one, on climate change, what are your recommendations or proposals to face this issue? Thank you very much.
Who wants to take it?
Yeah. Maybe if I can beg your indulgence, could you repeat the first one? The first question, yes, please.
What are the main challenges to achieve the fully recognition and participation of indigenous people in societies?
I will attempt to answer the first one. I think, and let me say it is my personal opinion, we are still struggling with the name indigenous, marginalized, disadvantaged, vulnerable, and minority. And in my view, maybe these are some of the things which are still hampering. I'm talking in terms of my country, Namibia. Yeah, these might be some of the obstacles which are still stopping the indigenous or the IPs to achieve the full recognition from the government. But to be honest and frank with you, my government, that is the Namibian government, is trying her level best. Just imagine to go to an extent of a point. I'm also one of the marginalized people, of which the current president, Dr. Hage Gottfried Gengop, have appointed me now to lead this division. And on top of that, we have got other traditional leaders from the same communities of mine, meaning the marginalized or the IPs, who are also recognized to be the traditional leaders from their respective territories. Thank you.
Waldo, thank you very much for your question. I might add to the first. I agree with my colleague. I do believe that first we need to define how we are going to be denominated, because according to the states, if something is not defined, obviously they will not be able to do it. But once we overcome this, I believe that it will be necessary to create sensitivity amongst the state as to the need to recognize indigenous peoples. Many states say they do not have indigenous peoples. It isn't that there are none. It is simply that it's out of convenience not to recognize them. So I believe that this work must be done, not just from the UN, but the countries themselves, so that we'd be able to start to work. The main way in which I coincide with you is that to whom is this addressed? And if we don't talk about recognition of indigenous peoples, then there's nothing to implement, because we simply say there isn't anything. So we have to do this work at the local and at the UN level in order to create sensitivity amongst the state, so that the great majority, if not all, have indigenous peoples, tribes, or minority groups, however you want to call them, those that we were initially in each and every region. The UN has 7 regions. In those 7 regions, we do have indigenous peoples. So I believe that it is important to carry out this work within the UN and also at the state level for us to do that work and fight through this from there and just strengthen it here. As to climate change, I had mentioned that we might know the West, the Western world, but that they might not know us, because their interests, it is clear to me, their business interests, financial interests, when they talk about the world, and we talk about Mother Earth, and from there, it's a different concept. Their philosophy, of course, given our worldview, is different. So as a response to how can we respond to climate change, it is precisely in that sense to recognize us, to know that indigenous peoples and communities, we preserve the original land because it's the one that provides for us, it's the one that provides life. And that in other cultures, it is seen as the one that provides wealth, but monetary wealth. So we must link those two situations together. This is only achieved through communication and getting to know one another. I think that's my contribution to that.
Very good questions. I think solution of actually getting the UNDRIP operationalized. You have to start a dialogue with the respective peoples in the respective countries, and the solution is there somewhere. One aspect that I think states underestimate is that a people is usually unproductive and unwilling to contribute to the state if they are not recognized and actually being regarded on an equal footing as the UNDRIP speaks of. So there's a huge gain in actually getting the whole population in question and the whole people in question mobilized in contributing to the common good. And but governments must also understand that since many indigenous peoples are deprived of resources to actually organize themselves well, they have to be open to put things on the table in order to make things work. But it's a combination of efforts. But at least start the dialogue, and you will be able to harvest the fruits in the aftermath of a long, maybe complicated process, but it will bring fruits. That's our experience. When it comes to climate change, one of our challenges being part of the Arctic is that we feel the effect of climate change early, and it can be tough. But when we as a global community are searching for solutions, we have to have a sound dialogue on that. Because for now, some of the solutions are actually harming a large portion of indigenous peoples rather than assisting and helping and working with. I'm talking about renewable energy sources that demands huge area of land mass, like windmill projects, like biofuel projects, and others that are actually usually those resources and areas are usually found on indigenous people's land. And if climate change is the excuse of eradicating large portion of indigenous people's land in the name of climate change, that is a harmful process. And it doesn't support the Sustainable Development Goals of leaving no one behind. And someone will be behind because of that. So that was just a comment on that.
Yes.
Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. I wanted to have a Norway question, which is, it's related to the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a big issue here in the United States. So I've seen, it seems like with the assistance of some Saami advocacy, that a pension fund there disinvested. But is it your understanding that the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway is still invested in the Dakota Access Pipeline? I saw an article that the Sioux tribe is trying to meet with them. So what's your understanding of the relationship between these various Norway funds and this Dakota Access oil pipeline project? And for the other two panelists, I heard you say that the UN is very helpful in all this, and it may well be. I just wanted to, like, for example, the new Secretary General, has he met with the groups that are here for the forum this time? Are there any things that you think that the UN Secretariat could be doing better than they currently are doing, or the human rights mechanisms in Geneva? I'd just like to sort of open that open-ended question. Thank you.
Do you want to? Let's start with the Norway question.
Okay. Yes, it's true that the Saami Parliament and Saami organizations and basically a lot of Saami individuals has engaged very actively in the Standing Rock issue. As I understand, there's one pension fund that has divested. There was also one of the largest banks in Norway has partly divested, but also has sold its mortgage to the project to others, so they are completely out of that project now. When it comes to the Sovereign Pension Fund, there has been meetings, and we have taken also from the Sami Parliament side initiatives to get a dialogue on that. But as far as I know, they haven't divested yet, but I must sort of, they are not very open when they are going to divest. They are so big that they are very secretive. There might be news next week that they are out, but I don't know.
Minister?
Thank you. I think I have stated something with regard to the assistance from the UN, or what us Namibians want the UN to do. In my statement, I said that we urge the United Nations and the United Nations agencies to continue and strengthen its support to member states in the implementation of its programs. And the second one, I went on by saying that we also urge the United Nations systems to continue with the implementation of equal representation of all indigenous peoples from different continents in its decision making. And maybe lastly, is that maybe His Excellency is still busy. He might come to us, I don't know, probably by next week. This one is now a guesswork, but we will see if his schedule allows him. Would he be in a position to visit us in Africa? Thank you.
Yes. In fact, we haven't yet met with him. It is one of the challenges that we have in order to continue to increase the participation proposal of indigenous peoples within the UN. Yes, I do believe we still have a lot to achieve. And I was previously saying we must do it evenly as partners. I believe that the Secretary General will be in the city tonight. Thank you for the information. Una pregunta más?
Two more.
Thank you.
Ones.
Thank you very much for this presentation. My name is Abadi. I write for the paper, Le Dossier. In trying to implement the rights of indigenous people, you always speak about support from the government and from UN, from specialized agencies. What about the non-indigenous NGO communities? How much support do you get from them, and what do you do to gather that support?
I will be the first one to answer. Of course, when we're talking about, we talk about states because they're the ones who have the resources and the capital to be able to achieve implementation of what we might consider an internal policy of each country and how to manage their groups and societies, including indigenous peoples. But it is true that there are foundations that have been helping and cooperating in the implementation in terms of organizational level with the indigenous peoples. In Latin America, which is where I belong, I believe that we have had great cooperation from the World Bank with FAO in many respects, and with some private organizations that have been doing daily work and well-coordinated work as to the implementation of organization means that are in harmony with the state. I do not believe that I am equipped to talk about other regions, but at least in Latin America, I believe we have been very fortunate in the sense of participation, fundings, NGOs, and in some other instances, such as the World Bank, that has assisted us in the implementation.
Yes, and Charles Baltic Review. I have two questions for the representative of the Saami Parliament in Norway. One is, what is the Saami Parliament in Norway doing to protect Saami cultural heritage sites? And what are the requirements to be able to vote or be elected to the Norwegian Saami Parliament?
Okay. Cultural heritage sites is actually the responsibility of the Saami Parliament, and it's we manage it, and by law, any artifact or site older than 100 years are automatically, what do you call it? Safeguarded by law, so it can't be destroyed without it being released by the Saami Parliament, and we have the authority right on that issue. When it comes to voting, the Saami Parliament is based on an electoral role, so it's elected by and from the Saami population in Norway. And the criteria there follows actually UN-guided principles for identifying. And that's the first one is that you have to actually yourself identify that you are a Saami. It's a self-identification clause because it's your human right to create your own identity. The second clause is an objective criteria that goes to a lingual connection to the Saami language, either that it's your home language, it's one of your parents' home language, one of your grandparents' home language, or even one of your great-grandparents' home language, because the language has in some areas been lost for a while, but they are strong. There are other strong cultural elements. And the third point is that after you have enrolled, it's out for public scrutiny. So it can be objected that people can actually say that, well, this person does not have. So then it goes for a further review before it's accepted finally into the electoral roll. And the elections are every 4th year at the same time as the National Parliament of Norway.
Okay, thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you all for coming.